Do you have a few minutes?
I gotta make some changes in my life. Do you even realize what your life means?
Morning Cup of Joe, a Missouri S&T podcast using pop culture to destigmatize mental health.
Fake laugh, hiding real pain.
Do not self-destruct.
I didn't ask for this to happen.
Join us in using everyday examples to explain usable techniques to help improve your mental well-being.
Stay a while and listen.
Welcome back, minors. My name is Traci Kriegel, and I'm a counselor here at Student Wellbeing.
And my name is Amber Johnston. I'm also a counselor here in Student Wellbeing, and it's time for your Morning Cup of Joe. I know that a lot of our listeners are fans of sci-fi and fantasy, and this week we're going to be talking about one of the best sci-fi books of all time and one of the best sci-fi movies. I won't say that it is the best, but it's definitely one of the best. It's based on originally was a novel by Andy Weir, and in 2015 it became a movie starring Matt Damon. And that is The Martian. We're going to be using it to talk about a DBT skill called opposite action.
Nice. And so DBT, which if you're not familiar with what DBT is, it's dialectical behavior therapy. It's based on CBT, which is cognitive behavior therapy. And its main goal is to help people regulate their emotions and improve interpersonal relationships through mindfulness techniques, using your senses and tools which help us to regulate our emotions. So if you've been to student well-being or if you've been to a counselor, you may have heard those terms or terminology such as DBT or CBT.
Or your psychology class.
Or your psychology class, yeah, exactly.
Your intro to psychology class, if they covered any of the major theories or some of the different psychiatrists, psychologists in history.
If you maybe watched a TEDx talk or, or you just watched YouTube, I'm sure you've heard of somebody talking about CBT or DBT.
Yep. I am very hard-pressed to find a situation where we would need skills like emotional regulation and improving our interpersonal relationship skills than The Martian. Can you?
Exactly. So for those of you who have not read the book or seen the movie, the story centers around Mark Watney, who played Matt Damon. I absolutely love this movie. And what he did is he was on a mission to Mars when he accidentally was left behind after his crew assumes that he had been killed during the storm. Watney's left alone on Mars with a very small amount of food and water. He had no way to communicate with Earth and little hope of rescue short of the next mission, which is scheduled 4 years into the future.
Yeah. He actually, the communication antenna is actually stabbed him.
Right.
And that's why they thought that he had died, was because he was stabbed. Now, for most of us, this would be a highly stressful and overwhelming situation. But what Watney does here is very indicative of the DBT skill of opposite action. The basic idea is that our emotions are there in order to spur us to take action and do specific things in order to survive and thrive and meet our goals. The problem arises when our emotions encourage us to act in ways that are unhelpful or even counterproductive. When these mechanisms are working correctly, our body gives us the signals, and then we fulfill the signal, and everything goes correctly. When we get hungry, therefore we need to eat. We get thirsty, we know we need to drink. If we get tired, we know we need to rest or sleep. When it goes awry is when we get angry or sad. And that's when it can really be counterproductive.
Right. So imagine for a moment, just go with me, how when Watney wakes up, he's injured and a piece of the communication antenna is pierced in his side. Oh, it's awful. His low oxygen alarm's going off. Beep, 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 beep. And you're on Mars alone.
That scene's overwhelming to watch just as an observer, because the oxygen alarm is really, really, really loud, and he's really out of it, and all this is
It's just frightening. So now just imagine that scene. So just think with me for a moment some of the emotions, how you would feel at that very given moment. Like, I have chills right now just thinking about antenna stabbed into me, like I'm all alone, that loud beeping noise.
You're not just alone. You're the only human being on the planet.
Yeah, you're not on Earth.
Yeah.
You are on Mars.
There's no help coming. You're completely isolated and cut off from everyone and everything.
And oxygen. Your oxygen sensor's beeping. Like, that's your lifeline to breathing.
Yeah, and we take oxygen for granted, like, a lot. So now, like, even this basic thing that we don't even think about, breathing in and out, is in danger.
So what would your emotions be? So you would likely be in physical pain. You would be confused. You would be afraid. You'd be anxious, overwhelmed. These are kind of just, I'm saying these emotions out loud. I'm thinking, I'm calm saying these emotions, but I'm thinking I would be like,
Yeah.
So let's start with some of the obvious emotion, fear. So fear would want to immobilize us.
That freeze part of that fight,
Yeah.
flight or fight or freeze, because there's nowhere to run. Remember when we talked about the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system?
Right.
And we talked about that when we get to the point where our system totally shuts down. That's where we be, like, the system totally shuts down. Our brain, our cognitive function, all of that completely shuts down when we think there's no way to escape.
Right.
And that's where he would be. There's no way to escape. It's not like he could suddenly make 7-Eleven appear on the corner. Like, he's there and there's no way out. So think about that shutdown that happens.
Yeah, just like in that frozen state or maybe that runaway state, but especially combined with fear and feelings of overwhelm. I think it would have been easy to give up. And after all, he knows he doesn't have enough food, he doesn't have enough water or oxygen to survive, and especially for the next mission, which is 4 years away.
Right.
I mean, all the imaginable thoughts that had to be going through his head at that given moment. I mean, he doesn't even know if the temporary shelter is operational at this point. Like, he's just sitting there, like, contemplating all these things are going through his head. So
It's a massive storm.
yeah, and so the same store that left him abandoned had caused him to be injured, could have caused debris to damage the shelter. So he doesn't all that thought's going through his head. So there's no way for anyone to reach him, and no doctors are available. So, like, all the thoughts are running through his head, like, I'm here, I'm alone, gosh, what am I going to do? There's, blah, 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 blah. So it would be very difficult for him to not be in, like, a total state of panic and immobilized in that moment, like, just blah. So, but he doesn't do that. Watney gets up, he walks to the hab, which is a temporary shelter, and sets about trying to survive.
Yeah. He first treats his injury, performing the surgery on himself. Like, he literally performs surgery on himself. You're thinking about, like, his action, like that opposite action, the action that he feels like his brain is wanting to do is that panic. He's doing the opposite. He's not panicking. He's staying calm. He is treating this injury and suturing himself up, removing the antenna from his body, and then he looks at the food.
Just when that happens, it's like.
Yeah, I grit my teeth every time. I must have seen this movie dozens and dozens of times, and every time I watch that scene, it makes me grit my teeth.
Yeah, it's like, oh gosh.
Yeah.
Can you imagine pulling that out of your own flesh?
Yeah. Well, and if any of you have not seen this movie, it is a sci-fi movie, and it's set in the future, but it's not set, like, super far in the future. It's only, like, 11 years?
2035.
Yeah.
Like, a long time ago, that would have been forever in the future, but 11 years
really
from now.
Not. And so the technology that they have isn't that far advanced from where we're at right now. It's not like Star Trek or Star Wars.
Yeah.
It's a little bit further than we are now, but not tremendously. So he sits down and he starts literally taking an inventory of the food. So he starts, like, looking at how many meals he has, and he quickly realizes, because they had planned on these, all of the individuals in there, each of them gave them enough food for short period of time while they were there, and then an extra like 6 months worth of food, and then they had one special meal that they had planned for Thanksgiving. So the and quickly realized that this is not going to be enough for him to survive literally 4 years. That's a long time.
That is a long time.
So he figures out he has to have an additional food source. So instead of giving up, he starts looking for seeds he can plant because he's a botanist.
Yeah.
He finds potatoes in that Thanksgiving meal that they were given for their Thanksgiving, and he decides that he's going to grow potatoes on Mars. Now think about this for a second.
What wonderful critical thinking skills.
Yeah. Because not only, like, he has to not only figure out, okay, what can I plant? He has to figure out how I can plant it. Because he needs water. He needs soil that can actually grow things with nutrition and all of those things. He's going to need fertilizers and all of these pieces there. But instead of panicking and saying, hey, I don't have these things, I don't have enough food, he just sets about systematically going about each problem analytically.
It's awesome. When you're talking about this, I keep thinking, and this is a little bit off topic, but I'll come back to topic. I think of this relates to how students work when they do O Week and they're building their cars. They have to, create that car, and they have to analytically think about, how do I make my race car? How it's going to perform at the highest level.
Right.
And they have to utilize all the skills. They have to utilize the tools. And I think that's kind of like that first step that they take when they set foot into this campus, is stepping outside the box, utilizing those critical thinking skills. They're given a small amount of tools, and they look at what small amount of tools they have to be successful, to create that eventual end product to be the very best that they can have.
Well, but think about that. That's on a smaller scale. Isn't that exactly what's going on?
Yeah.
Because he's student spends all this time on this car, and then it doesn't work, or something happens, or whatever, then they have to keep their emotions regulated, go in, figure out how to solve the problem, and then come at it from a new angle without keeping those emotions regulated and without that sense of panic. But if I've got a lot of investment and I think that I'm going to fail my class, or I think I'm going to do this, or I think I'm going to do that, now that adds that pressure in there. And my brain is going to want to panic. It's going to want to freak out. And that doesn't get us the goals, doesn't meet our goals.
Right, exactly.
Going back to the potatoes. So he decides to grow the potatoes. He finds those. He's got to figure out soil, so he has to, he basically raids their waste, the biological waste, and uses that as fertilizer. So he makes an indoor greenhouse and then manages to covers that area with plastic, and then burns the excess rocket fuel in order to create water to feed the plants. It's just so ingenious the way he does it.
Yeah, that's why it reminds me so much of our students here, because they just have to create all these unique, engineered items.
Yeah.
So
That's what he did.
That's what he did. But, so with him, each solution he brought had a few new problems to him. So if he got enough food, he would not have enough water. And if he got enough food and water, then he was assuming the structure was in it to last a month, could last for 4 years. He lays this out, lists all the hazards, and it would have been easy to give up or freeze up to see no point, but he doesn't. Instead of focusing on all he could not control, he focused on what he could control. That's similar to the concept of the circle of control that we have talked about before, right? Right. So he took stock in what he had and started to take action. Then once he had a solid plan for food and water, he leaves the somewhat safety of the hab to find a probe from 1997 that may or may not work. And remember, this movie is set in 2035. So that probe would have been almost 40 years old at this point.
Yeah.
That makes me feel really old. So he then travels a month to get this probe, an entire month, which may or not have been functional. Getting it, he works out a communication system to use to talk to NASA Earth. That's phenomenal.
It's crazy the way he does it, because what it does is it talks to the mirror device that basically they had the same probe on Earth that was the sister device of the one that they had up there, and they use it to communicate with him up there. And nobody knows how to run it anymore.
Right.
I mean, it's
It's old.
40 years old. Like,
Yeah.
the people who built it are, have retired and moved on with their lives at this point. And they've got to figure out how to use this. It's just absolutely amazing, like everything he does. But think about this in terms of the Maslow's hierarchy. Like, he essentially was going up the hierarchy. What is the immediate need? Air. And then, that safety need, at the bottom of the pyramid, and then he worked up from there. And as he addressed each need moving forward, he was moving up the hierarchy and able to increase his function. But he did that because he was able to keep himself from panicking.
Right. Definitely.
It's amazing. And he does all of this despite the fact that he's feeling fear, despite the fact he's overwhelmed. He's very open about the fact and very much voices his fears and his concerns. He's not delusional at all in this. He's very aware of what could happen at any moment. He even says, like, there's a scene where there's a storm and he's counting food and he is literally sobbing because the only thing keeping him alive at that point is a sheet of plastic. Because if that is ruptured, his air is gone.
Right.
And he is, like, crying while he's counting meals. And that scene is just so powerful.
Yeah. Yeah, this movie is it really puts you in touch with the fact that social connection is important.
Right. Well, because he has nobody to talk to, nobody to bounce this. So he's in there watching reruns of Happy Days? Wasn't it Happy
I think
Days?
something, yeah. It was just
It's like an old TV show of some kind, but I think it was Happy Days on a tablet, and that was his connection to the world. It's and the music, and he criticizes his captain put all of this, like, 70s disco music on, so the only music he had to listen to was, like, disco for the entire time he was stuck there. And so he, of course,
4 years of disco.
well, luckily he wasn't stuck there for that long. But,
Right. It would be awful.
but yeah, it's that human connection. It's finding ways to touch back with the people and the memories and the connections you have with other people.
Right. So it goes back to the opposite of fear and action. Doing all these things, he's able to survive because he's keeping his emotions regulated. And he doesn't suppress them. You can see him visibly feeling his frustration, his fear, his anxiety throughout the movie. He simply chooses the opposite action. He does the opposite of what he's actually feeling. So when he's feeling frustrated, keeps going. He doesn't let the frustration keep him down. So doing the opposite of what he's feeling.
Yeah, frustration is going to make him want to give up. Instead of giving up, he presses on.
And
then when he gets feedback from NASA, and NASA is, like, telling him,
nobody's coming.
Instead of giving up, he presses on. Does he cuss him out a little bit? Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
That part is really funny.
Yeah.
But he tells him exactly what he thinks of him. But at the same time, he doesn't give up, because that would have been easy to do. Now I've gone through all of this. I've bent over backwards to find a way to communicate, because they literally use the probe and a tennis ball to work out a system of pointing the probe's camera at different letters in order to form words, kind of like a Ouija board or something. Like, I don't even know what you call it. And I mean, because there's no audio devices. So he's writing messages on signs and then having the probe point to letters for him. And it took 15-minute delay
To get a communication.
So think about how difficult that is to have a conversation. And it's literally life and death. And then they come back and they're like, oh, by the way, we can't help you.
Do you remember the old Motorola texting when you had the little texting. Did
If
you ever
had
have
to
a
press X like 10 times? Yeah.
Yes. Anybody ever had a Motorola texting phone where you had the text on the numbers? You will understand what we're talking about. A, B, C was on one.
Yeah,
D,
you had to
E,
press
F
it
was
so
on
many
two.
times. It was terrible.
You pressed it once, you got A. If you pressed it twice, you got B. You pressed it 3 times, it was C.
Well, but if you wanted lower cases, you had to press it 6 times
Oh my
or
God.
4 times
I
or
don't
6.
know.
You know what I'm saying? Because
Yes,
the first
but-
time through was uppercase, the second time through was lowercase.
Yeah, it was very annoying. But that's
Yeah.
similar to what he was doing. There was just such a delay in communication, which could have caused emotional dysregulation. But he did the opposite of that. He created a level of regulation.
He discharged the emotion. He expressed his frustration. He expressed his emotion. He didn't suppress it because what we're talking about is not suppression. It's opposite action.
Right.
So he's still feeling these things.
Yep.
That's the point that we want to bring across. He's still feeling frustrated. He's
Yeah.
still feeling angry. He's still feeling overwhelmed. But he is working through them and doing the opposite of what that emotion is telling him to do.
Right.
The fear tells him to stop. The frustration tells him to stop, to give
Right.
up. But he's not doing that.
Right. Exactly.
So how can we ourselves use this skill in our daily lives? Well, when we're faced with an emotion that if we act on it would be counterproductive, we simply act the opposite way. If we feel angry, instead of attacking or defending, you ever talk to somebody and you get angry at something they say, our gut reaction is to either attack that person and insult them or be angry at them, or to get defensive and overly defend ourselves, again, wrecking that relationship. Simply showing kindness or walking away from the situation instead would be an example of that opposite action. This would be also a time where we can set boundaries. We can use those assertiveness skills instead of those aggressiveness skills. But anger is going to want us to do that fight or flight. We're going to want to fight the other person or run away. Sometimes when we feel angry, we want to hurt the person that hurts us. We want to punish them, but if we can, that can often backfire and cause us to look bad. It can cause people to think badly of us. Instead, if we just focus on setting the boundaries and act with kindness, and this is key, not niceness, because niceness is our doormat and kindness is assertive. We want to be assertive, not a doormat.
Correct.
And we protect ourselves without lashing out at the other person.
So what about shame? So if we feel shame, we can act confident.
Yep.
Maintain eye contact, stand tall. Our shame makes us want to hide and appear small, but that can be counterproductive and can make the situation worse. It can make others lose confidence in us and can damage trust. By acting confident and taking accountability for our actions, we can garner trust. Instead of hiding our faults, we don't own up to it. Don't make excuses and address the issues head on.
Yeah. And that's one of the biggest things that makes people lose trust in us is when we try to make excuses and we get that defensiveness.
Right.
So instead of doing that, taking responsibility, addressing the issue, and then and moving on with confidence.
Right.
And going on to fear. If we feel fear, we can look at the situation and ask ourselves what we can do to make it better. Just like Watney did. If he would have given in to the fear and the panic, he would not have survived that situation.
No, definitely not.
And he absolutely, not to spoil the movie, but he absolutely does live.
Yeah.
Instead, he kept moving and he kept working and he didn't give up. He focused on what he could control and the things he could do instead of the things he couldn't control. He could not control when the front part of the hab blew off and exploded, and he lost the front part of it, and he had to put up that literal plastic sheeting, which was his only protection from the elements. He didn't have control over those situations, so he kept focusing on, I can't control the storm and the plastic sheeting right now. Anything could come along and break that at any moment. Instead of focusing on that, I'm going to focus on what I can control, which is counting the food and seeing where I'm at. if we feel depressed, as I'm sure Watney also felt, we can actively engage with others rather than avoiding contact with other people and isolating ourselves, which is usually what we want to do when we're feeling that way. If we feel disgust, we can push through discomfort and face the situation. You absolutely see Watney do this when he adds water to the human waste and make fertilizer. He's got to stick his hands in it and move it around in order to make this a viable fertilizer to put down for the potatoes. And you can see that he's completely disgusted by this, but he pushes through and he does it anyway. It smelled bad, it was disgusting, he gagged, and he just kept going. He got the plants fertilized and they grew, and that's what gave him the food supply he needed. And if we feel guilt, we can apologize sincerely and mean what we say rather than just avoiding the situation and hiding in shame. Which, how often do people do that? They feel guilty about something and so they just hide.
Just hide, yeah. You know, this one we see that Captain Lewis, she felt guilty because she felt like she was responsible for leaving Watney on Mars. She made that decision to leave. You know, she apologized, she took accountability, and when given the opportunity to make it right, she did. She could have made excuses, she could have been defensive, she could have shifted the blame to the equipment, which wasn't working properly. Mm-hmm. It would have been valid, but would have been counterproductive. Instead, she took accountability and fixed the issue and brought her crew home safely.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. The life support machinery or equipment, like sensors on Watney's suit, showed him as being dead,
right?
Which is part of the reason why they thought he was gone. She could have absolutely went into that defensive mode and be like, but his sensors showed that he was dead. It's not my fault, you know, and in all of this. Mm-hmm. And you know what? Everyone and their brother would have taken her side, and they would have been like, yeah, it's not your fault. But ultimately, would that have gotten the goal done of getting her whole crew home safely? No, it wouldn't, because it didn't matter. The blame part did not matter at that point. Mm-hmm. What mattered was getting everybody home safe.
Right. You know, when you're the captain of the ship, you got a lot of responsibilities. So she had to take that responsibility on herself. So
absolutely.
Yeah, that's the hard part.
In the movie, at one point, he says, in the face of overwhelming odds, I'm left with only one option. I'm going to have to science the blank out of it. Like, it's one of my favorite lines in the movie. And then he gets up and he starts doing exactly that. And that is the epitome of opposite action.
That's awesome. And where are we at? We're at a Science and Technology University.
Yeah.
And so for students, if you're listening to this, you need to science
the crud out of it.
The crap out of this college experience.
I love it.
Because you're going to face hard times.
Yeah.
Being in college is not easy. So if you take away anything from this episode today, do the opposite action if you're in a difficult situation. You know, there's going to be times where it's not easy. Mm-hmm. You might not get an A on that test. You might not be in a relationship that easy. Sometimes you just have to take the opposite action.
Yeah.
Push through. You know, Watney was in some really tough positions like we just talked about. Take the opposite action.
It's such a powerful tool. Really powerful tool.
Yeah. If you want to find out more about taking the opposite action and learn more of those tools, we're here at Student Wellbeing. We're available Monday through Friday from 8 to 5. Schedule an appointment at your student health portal. We'll be glad to speak with you.
Okay. Well, thanks for joining us this week, Myers, and we'll see you next week.
Take care. If you like this podcast, please remember to like and subscribe. To schedule an appointment or to reach out to us about future topics you would like to see, please email us at wellbeing@mst.edu. You can also reach us by phone at 573-341-4211. We are located at 204 Norwood Hall.
I accept the challenge.
Get out there and do your best!
Hey, go easy on yourself. Come on now.
Now you're talking!
For more mental health and well-being content, please follow us on Facebook at Missouri S&T Wellbeing and on Instagram at S&T Wellbeing.
But most importantly,
never give up.